From the outside, the house looked ordinary. The paint wasn't peeling. The lawn was trimmed. Packages were delivered to the porch like any other home on the street. Neighbors saw a quiet family who kept to themselves. Nothing seemed out of place. If anything, it looked stable. Safe. Inside, that word was repeated often. Here, you're safe. Out there, you're not. She grew up hearing those lines, so often they felt like facts. The world beyond the front door was described as unpredictable and cruel. Strangers were dangerous. Friends could betray you. Teachers couldn't be trusted. Even extended family members were painted as people who didn't truly care. Her mother positioned herself as the shield standing between her daughter and a hostile world. At first, it sounded loving, protective, responsible. Other kids envied parents who paid attention, who checked in, who set rules. So when her mother insisted on knowing every detail, every thought, every interaction, it didn't immediately feel wrong. It felt like involvement. When her phone was checked, it was called supervision. When invitations were declined on her behalf, it was called caution. When friendships slowly faded, it was explained as maturity. They're not on your level. They don't understand you like I do. Little by little, the house became smaller. The rules expanded quietly. No sleepovers. Then no after-school activities. Then no walking home alone. Curtains stayed closed for privacy. Doors stayed locked for security. If she stood too long at a window, she was asked who she was looking at. If she laughed too freely on a call, she was asked what was so funny. Every movement had a reason attached to it, and every reason came back to safety. She was told she was lucky. Other kids had parents who didn't care where they were. Other kids got into trouble. Other kids made mistakes that ruined their lives. Her mother made sure she wouldn't become one of them. The message was clear. Restriction was protection. Over time, the outside world started to feel distant. Not physically, but mentally. When you're told long enough that something is dangerous, your body believes it. She began to feel nervous at the idea of independence. Ordering food alone felt intimidating. Speaking to a cashier felt risky. Crossing the street without someone beside her felt wrong. The house, with all its rules, felt familiar. Predictable. Contained. But safety isn't the same as control. There were moments that didn't fit the narrative. The sharp tone when she asked too many questions. The cold silence that followed small acts of independence. The way affection could vanish without warning. Safety was promised, but it always seemed conditional. As long as she obeyed. As long as she agreed. As long as she didn't push back. If she expressed discomfort, she was told she was dramatic. If she mentioned feeling trapped, she was reminded of how dangerous the world was. You have no idea what's out there. I'm the only one who truly protects you. Fear became the glue that held the walls together. Visitors rarely came inside. When they did, everything looked normal. Her mother smiled easily, spoke kindly, presented herself as devoted and selfless. No one saw the tension in the air after the door closed. No one heard the whispered corrections, the subtle warnings, the reminders not to embarrass the family. The illusion worked because it was built carefully. There were no visible bruises, no broken windows, no shouting loud enough for neighbors to hear. Just a steady narrowing of space. A quiet rewriting of reality. A definition of safety that meant obedience and isolation. She learned to doubt her own instincts. If something felt wrong, she questioned herself first. Maybe this is what love looks like. Maybe this is what protection requires. Maybe other families are worse. Gratitude replaced resistance. Guilt replaced curiosity. The house remained spotless, structured, controlled. From the outside, it still looked like the safest place she could be. From the inside, the walls felt closer each year. At first, it sounded like love. Her mother didn't call it control. She called it protection. She said it calmly, like a fact no one could argue with. I'm doing this for you. You'll understand when you're older. The world isn't kind, and I won't let it hurt you. Every rule came wrapped in concern. Every restriction was explained as care. If she questioned why she couldn't go to a friend's birthday party, her mother would sigh and say those parents didn't supervise closely enough. If she asked to join a school club, she was told it would distract her from what truly mattered. When she wanted privacy, she was reminded that secrets were dangerous and that good daughters had nothing to hide. The message was consistent. Limits meant love. It was hard to argue with someone who claimed to be protecting you. Her mother framed herself as the only reliable source of safety. Teachers didn't really care. Friends were temporary. Extended family members were jealous or untrustworthy. Even doctors were questioned. They don't know you like I do. Over time, her mother's voice became the loudest one in her mind. Every opinion was filtered through it. Every decision had to align with it. Control rarely arrived in obvious forms. It slipped in through small habits. Her mother insisted on choosing her clothes because people judge quickly. She approved her hairstyle because appearance affects opportunity. She edited her homework because mistakes reflect poorly on the family. Even hobbies were monitored. If she showed interest in something her mother didn't value, it was dismissed as a waste of time. When she tried to express herself, the reaction shifted. Sometimes it was subtle. A disappointed look. A heavy silence at dinner. A comment like, "I didn't raise you to think that way." Other times, it was sharper. "After everything I sacrificed for you, this is how you repay me." The word sacrifice came up often. It made her feel indebted, as if independence was betrayal. Protection was used as a shield against criticism. If she said she felt suffocated, her mother would widen her eyes in disbelief. "You think I enjoy being strict? I do this because I love you." Love became proof that control was justified. If it hurt, that was simply the cost of staying safe. She started to censor herself before speaking. It was easier to agree, easier to nod, easier to say, "You're right." Arguments were exhausting, and they always ended the same way. Her mother positioned herself as the misunderstood guardian, the lonely protector carrying a burden no one appreciated. If she cried, it was because she cared too much. If she yelled, it was because she was scared for her daughter's future. Fear was woven into daily conversations. News stories about crime were repeated at the dinner table. Cautionary tales about reckless teenagers were shared as warnings. "See what happens when parents don't pay attention." Her mother would say this while tightening the boundaries even more. Later curfews were denied before they were even requested. Social media accounts were monitored. Passwords were demanded just in case. Control was not just about rules. It was about narrative. If something good happened outside her mother's influence, it was downplayed. A teacher praising her work was brushed off as favoritism. A friend offering support was described as naive. But if something went wrong, even slightly, it was proof that her mother had been right all along. "I told you so" became a constant reminder that independence led to danger. Slowly, she began to associate freedom with risk and obedience with security. The idea of making decisions alone felt reckless. When she imagined leaving home one day, anxiety filled her chest. Who would warn her? Who would guide her? Her mother had convinced her that survival required constant oversight. And yet, the protection never felt peaceful. It felt tense, conditional. If she followed every rule, things were calm. If she stepped out of line, even in small ways, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Warmth turned cold. Conversations turned sharp. The same person who claimed to be her safe haven could withdraw affection without warning. Love and fear blended together until she couldn't tell them apart. Her mother said she was building a fortress around her daughter. What she was really building was dependence. Decisions had to be approved. Opinions had to match. Emotions had to be justified. Even gratitude was expected on schedule. Any attempt at independence was reframed as rebellion. Any request for space was labeled disrespect. Protection, in her mother's vocabulary, meant ownership. And ownership was defended fiercely. The more she tried to grow, the tighter the grip became. At school, she watched other students move in groups. They made weekend plans in the hallway. They argued over where to sit at lunch. They complained about curfews that still allowed them to go out. She listened quietly, already knowing she wouldn't be joining them. Isolation didn't happen overnight. It unfolded in small, reasonable-sounding decisions. The first sleepover she was invited to seemed harmless. Her friend handed her a handwritten note with details, smiling with excitement. When she showed it to her mother, the response was immediate. "I don't know those parents." The word no came quickly, followed by a list of worst-case scenarios. What if something happened in the middle of the night? What if no adults were paying attention? What if older siblings had bad influences? By the end of the conversation, the invitation felt dangerous instead of fun. She returned the next day with a rehearsed excuse. My mom said I can't. It became a familiar sentence. After a while, invitations slowed down. Friends stopped asking because the answer rarely changed. Group chats continued without her. Photos were shared the next morning of inside jokes she didn't understand. She laughed along at school, pretending she had chosen not to go. Joining clubs wasn't easier. When she expressed interest in drama, her mother said theater kids were dramatic in real life too. When she mentioned soccer, she was told injuries could affect her future. Debate club was dismissed as political nonsense. Volunteer programs were called distractions from real responsibilities. Each activity was evaluated and rejected for her own good. Isolation was framed as focus. You don't need all those people, her mother would say. Friends come and go. Family is forever. The idea sounded comforting, almost wise. But family, in this case, meant one person. Conversations outside the home were gradually replaced with long lectures at the kitchen table. Instead of after-school hangouts, she went straight home. Instead of weekend outings, she stayed inside. Even at school, her social world felt monitored. If she mentioned a new friend, questions followed. Who are her parents? What do they do? What kind of grades does she get? The interrogation made her cautious. It felt safer not to share details at all. Keeping quiet reduced suspicion. Over time, friendships became surface level. She avoided getting too close to anyone because closeness required explanation. If a classmate texted her often, her mother wanted to know why. If a boy showed interest, her phone privileges were threatened. Messages were read just to make sure everything's appropriate. Privacy was treated as a privilege she hadn't earned. Isolation extended beyond peers. Extended family visits were limited. Holidays were often spent at home because relatives were described as judgmental or negative. They don't respect our values, her mother would say. Phone calls with grandparents were supervised. If she spoke too freely, the conversation was cut short later with a warning not to overshare family matters. Gradually, her world shrank to school and home. And even school felt temporary, a place she visited under invisible supervision. Her mother insisted on dropping her off and picking her up, even when other students walked or drove. Waiting in the parking lot became routine. There was little space for spontaneous conversations after class. She noticed how her classmates developed inside jokes, shared secrets, and built histories together. They referenced sleepovers from years ago, birthday parties, summer trips. She had no shared memories like that. Her experiences were mostly solitary, contained within walls that no one else saw. Loneliness didn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet. Sitting on her bed scrolling through photos she wasn't part of. Hearing laughter through the phone speaker before it was taken from her hand. Watching the clock on a Friday night while the rest of her class was out somewhere. Her mother interpreted the isolation differently. You're mature for your age. You don't need childish drama. I'm protecting you from heartbreak. The narrative remained consistent. Distance equaled safety. But distance also meant she had no outside perspective. No one close enough to notice changes in her mood. No friend who could say, "That doesn't sound normal." No trusted adult beyond her mother's influence. Without comparison, her situation felt standard. Maybe everyone's parents were this strict behind closed doors. Maybe this was what discipline looked like when it was done right. As her social circle narrowed, dependence grew. Her mother became her primary companion, advisor, and gatekeeper. Conversations revolved around home. Opinions echoed home. The fewer voices she heard, the more dominant one voice became. And the quieter her world got, the harder it was to imagine stepping outside it. Fear didn't always arrive as shouting. Sometimes it was quiet, measured, delivered in a calm voice that sounded reasonable on the surface. Her mother understood something powerful. You don't have to lock doors if you can control how someone thinks about what's outside them. Every warning was vivid. News stories were retold in detail, especially the worst parts. Kidnappings, betrayals, accidents, teenagers who trusted the wrong people and paid for it. These stories weren't shared randomly. They followed moments when she asked for more freedom. The timing was deliberate. If she mentioned going to a friend's house, a story about something terrible happening at a sleepover would surface that same evening. Do you think their parents will protect you like I do? The question lingered long after it was asked. If she pushed back, the tone shifted. Her mother didn't always yell. Instead, she described disappointment like it was a wound. I can't believe you don't trust me. After everything I've done for you. Guilt was heavy. It made her feel selfish for even wanting independence. Wanting space felt like betrayal. Fear was paired with responsibility. If something happens to you, I'll never forgive myself. That sentence carried weight. It suggested that any harm she experienced would be her fault for stepping outside the boundaries. The world wasn't just dangerous. It was waiting, watching, ready to punish mistakes. When she made small errors, like forgetting to text immediately after arriving at school, the reaction was intense. Her mother's voice would shake with anger disguised as panic. Do you know what could have happened? The incident would be replayed for days. Worst-case scenarios described in detail. By the end of the lecture, she felt reckless and irresponsible, even if nothing had gone wrong. Over time, she internalized the fear. Before asking for permission, she imagined everything that could go wrong. Before speaking to someone new, she questioned their intentions. Before making a decision, she pictured her mother's reaction if it failed. Emotional manipulation often wore the mask of vulnerability. There were nights her mother would sit at the edge of her bed and talk about how hard it was to be a parent, how exhausting it was to worry constantly. Tears would form as she described sacrifices made, opportunities given up, stress endured. I only have you, she would say softly. You're my whole world. That sentence didn't feel comforting. It felt like pressure. If she expressed frustration, her feelings were minimized. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. You don't know how good you have it. When she tried to explain that certain rules felt suffocating, her mother reframed the conversation. Suddenly, she wasn't a daughter asking for space. She was an ungrateful child attacking a loving parent. Arguments followed a pattern. First came concern, then guilt, then blame. By the end, she found herself apologizing for things she wasn't sure were wrong. The original issue would disappear, replaced by a new focus. Her tone, her attitude, her disrespect. Silence was another tactic. If she defied a rule, even slightly, affection could vanish for days. No warmth, no casual conversation, just cold politeness. The shift in atmosphere was unsettling. It made the house feel unfamiliar. She learned quickly that harmony depended on compliance. Fear also came disguised as prediction. If you keep acting like this, people will leave you. No one will care about you the way I do. The world eats girls like you alive. These statements planted doubt. Maybe she wasn't capable. Maybe she was too naive. Maybe independence would only prove her mother right. Her confidence eroded quietly. Decisions felt risky. Opinions felt unsafe to voice. She began seeking approval before completing simple tasks. The possibility of making a mistake felt catastrophic, not because of consequences outside the house, but because of what would happen inside it. The most confusing part was the inconsistency. There were warm days, laughter in the kitchen, compliments about her intelligence and maturity, moments when her mother seemed proud and affectionate. Those moments made the fear harder to identify. How could someone who hugged you tightly also make you feel small hours later? The unpredictability kept her cautious. She monitored her words carefully, studied facial expressions, adjusted her behavior to avoid triggering disappointment or anger. Living this way felt normal after a while. Constant awareness, constant correction. Fear wasn't loud enough for neighbors to hear. It didn't leave visible marks. It lived in tone shifts, in stories told at strategic times, in affection that depended on obedience. And slowly, she stopped trusting her own judgment. The realization didn't come all at once. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a single explosive moment. It started with something small, a sentence she overheard, a comparison she didn't expect, a feeling she couldn't ignore anymore. It happened during an ordinary school day. She was sitting in the hallway outside her classroom while two classmates talked nearby. One of them was complaining about her mom being overprotective. She checks my location sometimes, the girl said, rolling her eyes. It's annoying. The other girl laughed. Yeah, but at least she lets you go out. They continued talking, casually, but that sentence stayed with her. At least she lets you go out. The tone wasn't fearful. It wasn't whispered. It wasn't layered with guilt. It was just normal teenage frustration. Annoyance without fear. She tried to imagine complaining about her mother the same way. The idea felt impossible. Complaining meant consequences. Questioning meant conflict. The gap between her experience and theirs felt wider than she had allowed herself to see. That was the first crack. The second came when a teacher pulled her aside after class. Nothing serious. Just to check in. "You're very quiet," the teacher said gently. "If you ever need support with anything, you can talk to me." The offer felt unfamiliar. Support without interrogation. Concern without control. She nodded politely, but later that night the words replayed in her head. "If you ever need support." It sounded simple, but it implied something important. Help didn't have to come with strings attached. She started paying attention differently after that. When her mother warned her about the world, she noticed how specific the fears were. When she was denied permission to attend a school event, she compared the risks described to what she actually saw at school. It didn't match. The world her mother described sounded chaotic and predatory. The one she experienced felt normal, manageable. One evening, she gathered enough courage to ask a question she had avoided for years. "Why don't you trust me?" The room went quiet. Her mother looked stunned, then hurt. "This isn't about trust," she replied. "It's about protection." The response felt rehearsed, familiar, and for the first time, it didn't fully convince her. If it wasn't about trust, why did every request feel like suspicion? Why did independence trigger anger instead of pride? Why did safety feel so heavy? She began noticing patterns. Every time she tried to grow, the rules tightened. Every time she showed confidence, she was reminded of danger. Every time she expressed discomfort, she was told she was ungrateful. It wasn't protection that scared her. It was the reaction to her growth. The realization deepened the day she secretly stayed after school for 15 minutes to talk with classmates about a group project. Nothing reckless, just conversation. When she arrived home slightly later than expected, her mother was waiting at the door. The questions came fast. "Where were you? Who were you with? Why didn't you answer immediately?" The tone wasn't worried. It was accusatory, suspicious. She apologized automatically, but something inside her resisted. She had done nothing wrong. She replayed the scene in her mind later that night. 15 minutes. A public classroom. Other students present. The reaction didn't match the situation. For the first time, she allowed herself to think a dangerous thought. Maybe this isn't normal. The word normal felt rebellious. It implied comparison. It suggested standards outside her home. She began observing other families more carefully. At school events, she watched parents interact with their kids. There were disagreements, yes, but there was also space. Laughter without tension. Eye rolls without fear. Independence encouraged, not punished. One afternoon, she searched online for phrases she had never dared to say out loud. Overprotective parent signs. Emotional manipulation in families. Control disguised as love. As she read, her chest tightened. The descriptions felt uncomfortably familiar. Conditional affection. Isolation from peers. Guilt used to maintain obedience. Seeing it written by strangers made it real. The idea that her mother could be the source of harm felt disloyal. Almost cruel. She had been taught that questioning her mother's intentions meant disrespect. But the evidence was stacking quietly in her mind. Protection shouldn't feel like imprisonment. Love shouldn't require shrinking. The final shift wasn't loud. It was internal, a subtle change in how she interpreted her mother's words. When fear-based stories were told, she recognized the pattern. When guilt was used, she noticed it. When silence followed minor defiance, she understood it as strategy rather than proof of her wrongdoing. She didn't confront her mother. Not yet. But something had changed. She no longer believed the safe zone was purely safe. Breaking free didn't start with packing a bag. It started in her mind. Once she saw the pattern, she couldn't unsee it. The fear-based warnings. The guilt wrapped in affection. The way every attempt at independence was treated like betrayal. Awareness changed something inside her. She began separating her mother's voice from her own thoughts. At first, the shift was quiet. When her mother described the outside world as dangerous, she mentally questioned it. Not out loud, just internally. Is it really that dangerous? Or is that what I've been told? When guilt was used to shut down a conversation, she noticed the technique instead of absorbing the blame. That small distance gave her space to think. She started building independence in ways that didn't immediately trigger alarm. At school, she stayed a few extra minutes to talk with classmates under the excuse of assignments. She volunteered for group projects that required communication outside class hours. She learned how to navigate conversations without asking for permission first. Each small step felt risky. Her heart raced the first time she made a minor decision without consulting her mother. But nothing catastrophic happened. The world didn't collapse. The sky didn't fall. Those quiet experiments challenged years of conditioning. She also began gathering information, not from her mother, but from neutral sources. Teachers, school counselors, online articles about healthy boundaries. She learned new vocabulary, autonomy, emotional manipulation, enmeshment, words that described feelings she had never been able to name. Naming something makes it harder to ignore. One afternoon, she accepted an invitation to study at a public library with 2 classmates. She told her mother it was a required group project, which wasn't entirely untrue. The entire time she sat at that table, she felt both terrified and alive. Terrified of being found out. Alive because she was making a choice. No disaster followed. The girls laughed over shared notes. They complained about assignments. They talked about small, ordinary things. No one pressured her. No one controlled her words. The normalcy felt almost unreal. When she returned home, the house felt smaller than before. Breaking free also meant preparing quietly. She focused on her grades with intention, not because her mother demanded perfection, but because she understood education could become an exit. Scholarships, college applications, opportunities that required physical distance. She began saving small amounts of money whenever she could. Birthday cash, leftover change. It wasn't much, but it represented possibility. A private safety net built in secret. Emotionally, the process was harder. There were moments she almost convinced herself she was exaggerating. Her mother could still be kind. There were evenings filled with warmth and shared meals. Doubt crept in during those times. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I'm ungrateful. But then the cycle would repeat. A request denied without discussion. A burst of anger over something minor. A reminder that she owed her mother everything. Instead of arguing, she adjusted her strategy. She stopped trying to win debates. She stopped trying to prove her maturity. She conserved energy, compliance on the surface, independence underneath. She also began setting small boundaries internally. When her mother criticized her choices, she didn't automatically accept the judgment as truth. When guilt was used, she reminded herself that someone else's emotions were not always her responsibility. The biggest shift came when she stopped seeking approval for every thought. She allowed herself private opinions, private dreams, futures that didn't center around her mother's expectations. The idea of leaving still scared her, not because of the outside world anymore, but because of the emotional storm it would create at home. She knew there would be tears, accusations, claims of abandonment. She rehearsed those scenarios in her mind, preparing responses that were calm instead of reactive. Freedom wasn't dramatic. It was strategic, built through quiet preparation and inner resilience. By the time she submitted her first college application without announcing it immediately, she understood something clearly. The safe zone had only ever been safe for one person's control, and she was no longer willing to live inside it.